thought you said they can move in early. Thinks they're getting robbed. Makes a turn, trips, he falls, he drops the gun. She lets out a blood-curdling scream. Welcome back to Real Estate Stories. This next story is a doozy. This is one that was submitted to me by an agent out in LA. This individual, who is a listing agent, is working with an investor who is out in New York. The investor has a house built with a contractor in LA, and once the property has been built, finished, they list it with this individual that submitted the story to me. The property, beautiful, fully staged, furniture, it's got it all. Property goes on the market, they end up getting an offer that comes in on the house. They go under contract. Everything's going perfectly, which in real estate, you know, means something bad's gonna happen. The closing is supposed to be taking place on a Monday. Well, on Friday, the buyer's agent calls the listing agent and says, hey, would it be possible if the buyers move in today instead of Monday when this is supposed to close? They have the whole weekend. I'll have to call the seller. I would imagine if he was okay with it, they'd probably have to release their escrow deposit, but I'll find out and I'll let you know. He calls the seller. The seller says, absolutely not. I'm not okay with someone moving into the house before it closes. Noted. Hangs up the call, calls the buyer's agent back, who doesn't answer. That evening, the buyer's agent calls the listing agent back. I spoke with the seller, and he's not okay with your people moving in early. Excuse me? The buyers already moved in. What do you mean they moved in? I thought you said if we released our escrow deposit, they could move in early. Listing agent says, that's not what I said. But at this point, it's kind of a little too late. Let's just get this thing closed on Monday. I'm not gonna say anything to the seller because he's gonna go nuclear. Now, if there's one thing about real estate is stuff does not go to plan a lot. And as you would expect, this property, it didn't close on Monday. Come Tuesday, doesn't close. Wednesday, you guessed it, doesn't close. It's 7 days, 10 days. Meanwhile, the buyers have moved in this property, using the utilities, bathing like Romans in the house. Listing agents freaking out, who still hasn't told the sellers who are in New York that there's people living in their house. This proceeds to go on for weeks.
3 weeks later.
The seller thinks the property's vacant. The builder thinks the property's vacant. The buyers think there's no big deal with them being in the house because their agent said it was okay. And this is where the story takes a bit of a turn. The builder of the home decides to get himself a little date. A date he paid for. A woman of the night. A woman with clear heels. A lady whose time is billed by the hour, if you're getting my drift. And he thinks, why don't I just take this lovely lady to this house I built that's fully furnished and staged and totally vacant? They get to the property and he's got the keys because, you know, he built it. They begin to do the horizontal mambo, the no pants dance, and they make a little noise. This ruckus wakes up the buyer upstairs, who gets up and in a stupor begins to stumble downstairs to see if maybe the TV was left on. When she gets downstairs, to her surprise, she sees an NC-17 film happening right in her living room. She lets out a blood-curdling scream. The builder lets out a scream. The prostitute lets out a scream. They create a harmony of screams because the builder doesn't know who this buyer is. The buyer doesn't know who the builder is. The prostitute just wants to know if she's gonna be getting paid. Through all of this screaming, it wakes up the buyer's husband, who thinks they're getting robbed. He quickly grabs a gun. He comes running down the hallway, makes a turn, trips, he falls. He drops the gun. It falls, clank, 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 all the way down the stairs and ends up at the feet of the builder, who picks it up. Now we have ourselves a good old-fashioned Mexican standoff. We have ourselves the Spider-Man meme, except one of the Spider-Mans has a gun, pointing at each other, screaming, yelling, just pandemonium. Finally, they end up kind of getting an idea of what's going on. They call the buyer's agent. The buyer's agent calls the listing agent. The police show up at the property. The buyers press charges against the builder. The builder presses charges against the buyers. It's just absolute chaos. Ultimately, the deal ends up closing. The buyers ended up selling that house maybe a year later and made a $500,000 profit. What a crazy, crazy story. And the moral of the story is don't move in unless you got confirmation, and don't bring a prostitute back to your house because it's illegal. This has been another episode of Real Estate Stories. Till next time.